Well, Michelle, one of the things we've been talking quite a bit about lately is job retention. This is something that we kind of see as a little bit of a problem all the time with our clients.
Yeah. You work real hard to get the job. You want to make sure you keep that job.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, jobs and the amount of time that people spend in jobs is getting a lot shorter as time progresses. You know, job security is a difficult thing to come by, but it's amazing. The longer I work in the employment field, it just becomes apparent to me that a lot of people burn themselves.
Yeah.
What I hope we can talk about today is the top 10 reasons that people have difficulty getting past that first 90 days of employment, often a probationary period. It's pretty standard at pretty much every job.
Yeah.
But between the two of us, I'm sure we've talked to thousands of clients and people who have either not made it past that 90 days on their own choice or because they've done something that has turned the employer off.
Yeah. And I don't think people realize how vulnerable they are, Mike. Like, they can let you go for any reason. They don't even have to tell you why. You know, when I worked as a manager in the past, my senior manager would come to me and say, 2 days before this person's passed their probation, let's talk. And there was literally a conversation like, are we keeping them on? Because there's no easier time to get rid of them than right now.
Beware.
And I think people need to know that those conversations are happening behind the scenes when they're new, and they need to have that person say, no question, this person needs to be hired on permanently.
Yeah, I even got an email from a client just yesterday that says I got fired on my 90th day. And, I didn't want to say to him, well, what'd you do or what didn't you do?
Yeah.
And I just kind of empathized, oh, those fools, how dare they? But it's so common, I wasn't even surprised.
Yeah.
The top 10 reasons, let's dive into them. Number one, it must seem pretty obvious, and at least it see's obvious to me, attendance issues.
Yeah, you got to show up every day. You got to show up on time, and I get, we got construction, we're gonna have winter coming, the buses run late, but everybody kind of has those same issues, and some people seem to make it in early and on time every day, and those that struggle, especially when you're new, like that's a huge red flag right off the bat.
And it also works in the other way. I guess that would be a green flag.
Yeah.
If you are the person who's there early every day and the person who stays late, that really reflects super well on new employees especially. I'm always reminded of George Costanza on Seinfeld, who got promoted to the top of the New York Yankees organization because he happened to leave his car in the parking lot and it broke down, and it looked like to his boss he was there first every day and last, when really his car was just broken. But yeah, you think about the inverse of that, and again, you come in late, the boss is definitely noticing.
I get people have lives, I get that people get sick, but really making sure you have really good communication and early communication if anything comes up, because you shouldn't be missing any days in your first 90, and quite frankly, in your first 6 months.
You shouldn't be missing any minutes, let alone days.
Yeah, absolutely.
The number 2 reason is unrealistic expectations.
Yeah. Well, I think some people go in and they think that the job is going to be perfect and their coworker's going to be perfect, and they kind of go in and it's a setup. They've set themselves up because there are no perfect jobs, and inevitably every job is going to have difficult people, right? And so you want to go in with realistic expectations about the people and the environment, but also about what you get. Right? You go in and your first month you're asking for a raise, or like, hey, can I work from home a couple days? Like, big ask, too early, too much.
Yeah, I did work with a guy once who quit because of the wage, and the only thing I thought was like, didn't they tell you what the wage was like when you were getting hired? But I think he had those unrealistic expectations and expected to come in and just do such a great job. They're like, here's money, take it all. Yeah. Where really, the wage is the wage.
Yeah.
It's not going to change. And if it is, it's going to, it's going to be a year or so probably before you start moving up that ladder. Unrealistic expectations can destroy you. And just, again, to add on to something you just said, there is no perfect job.
No.
That saying aggravates me. Again, working in employment, that idea that if you find a job you love, you'll never work a day in your life, that is utter beep.
Yeah. Well, and we want to make sure, when you go into a new job, expect that it's going to be hard. There's a learning curve. Right? It's probably uncomfortable. You're trying to get to know everybody and all the processes and all the things you have to learn. And if you go in expecting it to be challenging and reach out for those supports, then I think you're going to have a lot better time than if you go in expecting it to be easy.
Absolutely. The number 3 reason that people can't make it through those first 90 days is because they have a poor attitude and they are kind of bringing in personal stuff from home to the job.
Yeah. Well, I think attitude's everything.
Sure is.
And when we talk to employers, they say, hey, we can teach people all the skills that they need day to day. What's hard to teach is a positive attitude. And again, it can be hard, but you have choices, right? Am I going to go around and start complaining as the new person, or am I going to start, asking lots of questions and for extra training so that I really, understand that like attitude is everything, and I have to kind of check my personal issues before I show up at work.
Yeah, even before we started talking about this, we said that we should think back on some examples. And I swear, at every job I've ever had, there has been more than one person who has difficulties separating their professional life from their private life.
Yeah.
And come on, you got a job. That means that you have respite from that private life. Like, you should really be leaving those personal issues at home.
Yeah.
And if they're weighty, difficult things, what a gift a job is a place where you don't have to deal with those things and you don't have to think about those things. And believe me, your coworkers, as compassionate as they might seem, probably would rather talk to you about anything than the problems that you're having at home, especially work. They want to talk about work. When you're new on a job, I highly suggest that you ask your coworkers questions about themselves and get to know your coworkers.
Yeah.
Not share your stuff. Wait until they ask you.
Yeah.
It is, interpersonal skills are one of the things that lead to the most success in employment. And one of the easiest ways to fake your way through interpersonal is just to ask people questions.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that sweater. Where'd you get it?
Yeah. I think that segues into another thing that people kind of fall down on in terms of a reason that they don't make it past the first 90 days is that they don't put in that time to build credibility. Right? You show up, you might be amazing, but they don't know you're amazing yet.
Yeah, you're just a person. You're just a person.
You're just a newbie.
Yes.
So you have to kind of prove yourself, right? You got to be somebody who kind of shows your work, somebody who follows through, volunteers to, take on an extra project so that you kind of get noticed, because you got to kind of build up what sometimes we call the chip stack. I see it as in the game of poker, I got to build my chip stack before I have a little bit of leverage to make some moves.
Yeah.
I don't have any leverage when I'm brand new.
Yeah, you can't go all in with nothing.
Right.
Absolutely.
You got it. So just recognizing that it takes time for people to get to know you and trust you. And I think just going in curious, ready to learn, and showing people what you got is the way to do it.
It's not that hard to build credibility on the job. I can think of a job where I had, and I witnessed it happen, and it was the simplest thing. This was probably about 10 years ago, and I was working with a guy. He was brand new, and we walked into our workplace, and he picked up a piece of garbage off the floor and threw it in the garbage can. And the boss saw him do that, and it was just icing on the cake from there. Because for him to pick up something, which is obviously not in his job description, it just showed how conscientious he was.
Yeah.
It showed how much he cared about the job. He wanted a clean workplace. Someone had carelessly dropped whatever wrapper it is on the floor, and he thought that he would just pick it up. And he got lucky. He was witness doing that. Yeah. You did that earlier over there when you took that thing off the wall. You were like, this looks like crap. And you took it right off the wall. Well, there was no boss around to see it, and you got a ton of credibility. But if this was your first day, that would have been excellent, Michelle.
Yeah. Thanks. Well, I think little things are big things.
Yes.
And I think just paying attention to what is needed, with your customer, your client, your patient is everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The number 5 reason why people are often not making it past that 90 days, being dismissed as they easily can in that time period, are boundary issues and gossip.
Yeah. Well, I think that sometimes people are looking to create a support network at work if they feel isolated in their community, but I think it's risky, right? I think friendly, not friends, right? When I'm serving clients here at Pathways, I'm always friendly, but I'm not delving into their personal life. I'm not friends with them outside of work. I'm not doing business with them outside of work. I'm careful because I think sometimes those boundaries get really blurred and then that trust is broken. And people need to know that when they tell me something, I can keep it confidential. They need to know that when I say I'm going to do something, I follow through. And all those things, I think, are important around just setting some really professional boundaries. And it doesn't matter what your job is, Mike. It's not just when you work with people. I think every job requires good boundaries.
I couldn't agree more. And that idea of gossip, and even just talking about your coworkers in a negative way is like the worst thing you can do. You know, you might come in on your first couple of weeks and think you have a good relationship with someone, but you got to remember they've probably got like 5-year relationship with that person that you've decided to insult. You know, it's a classic thing my mom would say to me: if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. And of course, in the workplace, especially when you're new, that should have flashing red lights on it. Even if you think it's fun to make fun of your boss in past jobs, because a lot of people make fun of their bosses. Do not do that in your early days, you know, at a job.
I go into a room, and if somebody is gossiping, and I just kind of find a reason to kind of keep moving on or shift the subject. Like, I just think we don't need to lower ourselves to the level. We might not be the workplace gossip, but every workplace probably has one. So we don't need to participate. We don't need to make a big deal about it, but we can just kind of choose to not participate.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we both enjoy the television show Survivor. And I've got my own list of things I would do if I was on Survivor. And the number one thing is, don't say anyone's name. Right? They're always asking, okay, who should we kick out tonight? Who should we kick out tonight? And as soon as someone says a name, that's the person gets kicked out, the person who said the name, because they got, you know, so you just, I think that's a good life lesson. Just don't say people's names.
Yeah,
you know,
don't put a target on your back.
Darn right.
Yeah,
right? Like,
absolutely.
Absolutely. One of the hardest things about any job is change. Yeah. And the number 6 reason why people are not making it past that first 90 days is inadequate adaptability.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't love change, if I'm being honest, but I've learned that it's an essential part of being a good worker. So it's kind of like, get on board if you can feel uncomfortable, but you got to kind of do it. And what I don't think is a good idea is just going in like thinking you know and being rigid, right? I'm in my 50s, and so I have had some work experience. When I start a new job, right, I need to show my new team and my new boss, like, I'm open to learning. I'm open to learning from people of all ages. You know, I might come in with a bit of experience that gives me a bit of skill and a bit of knowledge, but boy, I've got a lot to learn. And the world's different than it was 5, 10, 20 years ago. So while I can come in and use that experience as, you know, an asset, I also have to remember I need to do a lot more listening than talking, because if I'm not flexible, they're not going to keep me.
Darn right. You know that process you love? It's about to change.
Yeah.
You know that software that you know inside out? Yeah. Don't worry, it's going to be updated in a minute, and you're going to have to learn that the home key moved or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Change is constant. If you're not changing, you're dead.
Yeah.
And you also have to be adaptable to doing other things. You know, I flash back again to the colleague who picked up the piece of garbage off the floor. Well, his reaction to that was not, where's the janitor, right? Or the classic, it's not my job. Yeah. It's not my job is poison. And it's not my job also says, I can't adapt.
Yeah.
I'm in this rigid state of work. And if you're asking me to send an email to someone I don't normally email, well, you should do it, but the last thing you should do is say, that's not my job. Yeah. Right? You gotta be willing.
Yeah. We forget that in the job description, there's a little sentence at the bottom that says, other duties as assigned.
Yes, and that could be
it could be a big part of your job because the world's changing. The job description you got hired for, when the world changes, your job has to adapt to that. And so that's not a punishment, that's just being reactive so your company stays viable, so you can keep the lights on and everybody keeps their job.
And keep in mind, in those first 90 days, they might be testing you.
Yeah.
Number 7, health and safety violations. Ooh, we're getting into the dangerous zone.
Yeah.
You know, what I've found and maybe experienced is that health and safety violations are an excellent way to get employees that you don't like out the door. It's not so much that you think they need to wear safety goggles, but if they're not wearing safety goggles, it's kind of like, oh, well, here's an opportunity to get rid of this person, right? Because those health and safety rules are in place for a reason. Yeah. And again, if you're flagrantly breaking them, every time you break one, that's being able to be dismissed with cause. Yeah. Right? So you better be on your boss's good side if you're going to take a day off of wearing your hard hat, or if you're going to wear slippers to work, or whatever health and safety violation it may be.
Yeah. You know, you don't want people to cut corners. And we know sometimes when people have worked there a long time, they'll start to do some shortcuts. If you see somebody taking shortcuts in their first 3 months, you know, you're thinking liability, liability, liability.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the things that you'll often talk about is communication in the workplace. Yeah. And how the lack of communication can cause damage to someone's reputation or lack of reputation, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that when you're new at a job, you know, people are afraid to ask questions. I don't want to seem like I don't know what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. You probably don't know what you're doing. You're learning. And so you got to tell people your needs, right? Maybe even say like, this is how I learn, or this is, you know, let people know, be vulnerable, because then they can help you to not be overwhelmed and learn your job, right? At the end of the day, if you're struggling, speak up, right? If you don't feel comfortable speaking up to the boss, reach out to your allies, you know, our employment retention specialist, our team here, because we're here to help when people get stuck when they're new at a job. You know, we've all worked really hard. You've worked super hard to get there. It's not going to be easy, but with that communication, that's how we make sure you get through that rough period and then sailing on to working there for many years as you want.
You know, I'll often find that new employees feel like they have something to prove, and they don't. They're hired. Yeah. That's it. You proved it. You got the job. Yeah. So you don't have to kind of overexert yourself in those early days, right? Just admit when you don't know something. Yeah. You know, show that you're ready to learn. Yeah. You've got nothing left to prove. Yeah. The proving was what got you the job. So communication, super important in work. Probably the most important skill in general. Yeah. And certainly, according to workforce development, the #1 skill mentioned in job postings in Southwestern Ontario is communication. Yeah. Gotta have it. Yeah. Number 9, telling others how to do their job while new.
Well, I've certainly had experiences with that. So I've worked in lots of different jobs, and I recall one job I had worked at. I was there, and I had to go off on a bit of a leave, and they'd hired a new person. I was like, awesome, and I came back, you know, from my leave, and I was like, hey, where's the new person? And they're like, oh, they got themselves fired. And I was like, what do you mean they got themselves? It's been a few weeks. And they're like, well, we were onboarding them, we were training them, they were supposed to be shadowing and listening and watching how we do the work. And instead of doing that, what they started to do was tell everybody how to do their job. And they did it to staff, and they started to speak out of turn with clients, and then they actually did it to the big boss. And that was the end of them, right? Like when you go in, again, we kind of lends back to that credibility conversation, but you don't really know why people are doing it. So when you're new, you got to kind of listen and, just kind of follow the standard operating procedure, and then, really make sure that you're not stepping out of turn by trying to tell everybody how to do their job when you really don't even understand how to do your job yet.
Yeah, I wonder if it's people trying to kind of exert themselves to show that they have management or leadership abilities. It's like, I'm going to get promoted quickly if they know I know everything. I don't know what the motivation is behind it, but nobody gets promoted in the first half a year. Lay back. Yeah. It should be very obvious if your colleagues want to hear your 2 cents, because they'll ask you. Yeah. Right? They'll say, hey, got an idea? Yeah. What do you think? Yeah, right? Otherwise, shut your mouth.
Yeah, I really think at the end of the day, maybe some people do it because they're nervous and they're overcompensating to show that they know, and I think other people are just know-it-alls. But regardless of the motivation, I think it's a bad idea. I think you need to be super careful and do a lot more listening and learning as opposed to telling other people how to do their job.
Darn right. Yeah. Ask questions. Don't provide answers. Yeah. Ask questions. That comes off very, very well. Yeah. Now, these have been 9 reasons why, people are being let go from their jobs. But there's a 10th thing that happens within that first 90 days. A lot of people quit in that 90 days. Yeah.
We certainly have folks that call us, and say, that's it, I'm not doing this job. It's not what I thought it was going to be. And, it's really hard, because, you quit, you've burned that bridge. Yeah. Right? You're not going to get a reference for them. You're going to have a longer gap on the resume. You got to start from scratch in terms of job searching, and probably some regret. Yeah. Right? And so I think it's really important, to, again, going back to that expectation. Know that it's probably going to be challenging, but that you're going to have to stick handle and problem solve through that to make it past those 90 days, right? You don't want to self-sabotage, and I would see quitting in that probationary period unless there's some massive red flags and you've really communicated with everybody and made a thoughtful decision. But that feels different than acting and making a thoughtful decision isn't reacting in a moment and, I quit and busting out the door, and then you really probably don't have a path back. Mm-hmm. I think it's really risky. I really would strongly encourage people to to not do that in a reactive way.
No, and it's easier to find a job when you have one as well, right?
Yeah.
It looks so like if you are quitting, make sure you got a job lined up next. And in this current job market, that's a little bit tricky. It does happen all too frequently because we get to deal with so many job seekers that we are seeing people quit jobs early. And I can say that the most common reason is interpersonal. Like there's some coworker who's a jerk and I can't work with this person. They're like, but you can, like, unless you're like allergic to their perfume and breaking out in hives or whatever, you can work with anyone. You've just got to kind of find ways to block it out. And I've, again, just looking back at a couple recent months, I don't think I've talked to anybody that was happy about quitting their job.
No.
That are always regretting it. And, a difficult spot that we're often in here is that if someone's telling me something that they should clearly regret, and I have to say something supportive, like, we can't change the past or whatever. But I'm witnessing regret all the time. And I've never heard anyone say, I quit that job and am I ever happy I did that? Right? It's instant almost.
And that's why I'm glad we're talking about it today, Mike, because we're trying to get ahead of this. So to say to people, listen, think about this, right? We all have bad days. We have moments where you're just going in and you can feel it. Like you're just, you're not as patient. You're starting to feel overwhelmed with what's happening at work or outside of work. This person's kind of pushing your buttons. But just going in with a plan to expect that those days are going to happen, especially in the beginning, and that knowing that you've got the skills and the supports that you can check in with so that you don't make a mistake that you regret. We don't want to have any regrets. We want to help people get jobs, work through the tough times, and then stay at that job for as long as they want, being in control of their career so that they have a steady paycheck coming in, they got purposeful work to do every day, and all the things that have people coming to Pathways to do.
Absolutely. And, when I facilitated workshops in the past, I used to say, finding a job is hard, but starting a job is harder. And, it's almost as if there's a prescribed way to find a job, and we can help people with that, right? These are the steps you follow. This is what you do. But those first 90 days don't truly have a script in the same way that finding a job does, right?
That's right.
Cover letter, resume. Well, anything can happen in those first 90 days, and a lot of people don't make it past them. We talked about 10 reasons why it might not end well. Well, hopefully it doesn't end. And hopefully a word or two that we've exchanged over the last 15, 20 minutes might help someone not quit or not get fired and embrace those 90 days as a learning opportunity. Be kind to your colleagues, show a willingness to learn, and show up every day on time and ready to work.
Yeah, absolutely. We want people to be successful in new jobs. I think, as you say, going in with that sort of clear mindset is going to be everything. Right? So thanks for coming and joining us today, having this conversation, and hopefully this has been helpful.